The awakening begins not with a sound, but with a persistent, low-frequency pressure on the eardrums. The steady, distant droning of the Persian wheel, rahat, already beginning its slow, unceasing turn. This sound, more vibration than noise, is the ambient pulse of the Arambag. It is immediately accompanied by the sensory oppression of the Indian climate, the heavy, saturating heat, thick and motionless, already clinging to the air inside the simple mud-plastered quarters. You are still horizontal on your woven charpoy cot, but consciousness is dragged back by the suffocating perfume. Not a light, pleasant fragrance, but a dense, humid cocktail of thousand blossoms, the cloying sweetness of night-blooming jasmine mixing with the sharp, earthy scent of disturbed soil, and the deep, slightly resinous odor of high canopy mangoes. You realize with the slow resignation of a body not quite ready for the sun, that the brief cold mercy of the night has fled, and the day begins instantly with a demand for labor. You are rising in the servants' sarai adjacent to the meticulously ordered Mughal garden, perhaps in Lahore or Agra, circa 1675, where the first rule of life is punctuality, and the measurement of time is the sun's rising intensity. You quickly rise, pulling on your simple cotton tunic, kurta, and tying your waistband, patka. The first rule of the garden is punctuality, though the day is measured not by clocks, but by the sun's rising intensity. Before the sun clears the palm fronds, you must be in the garden, ready to receive instructions. Your feet tread on the cool, tamped earth path leading from the servants' area into the central garden structure. The Arambag is not a wild, accidental space. It is a triumph of mathematical order and control, designed by Persian-trained engineers and architects. It is a four-part garden, Shahar Bagh, divided perfectly by two intersecting main water channels, Nahar, and walkways, symbolizing the four gardens of paradise. Every tree, every plant, every precisely leveled flower bed, takhta, has its designated, non-negotiable place. It is a geometry of green, utterly dependent on human diligence. The man you report to is the head Mali, gardener, often called the Mali Akas. His name is Akbar, a man whose skin is permanently stained green and brown from soil and plant matter, and whose hands are thick, calloused, and incredibly sensitive to the texture of a leaf or the dryness of the earth. Akbar has already been awake for 2 hours, performing the initial crucial water inspection. The first duty is a silent, observational circuit of the garden. You follow Akbar, absorbing the lessons through pure vigilance. The path takes you along the perimeter, where the garden meets the high, fortified walls that keep out the dust, the pests, and the prying eyes of the outside world. The sound that immediately dominates the environment is water. Though the air is still, the sound of water is pervasive. The gentle trickle of the shadar, the carved stone slope where water flows in a textured sheet, the distant groan of the Persian wheel, rahat, being readied for the day's lift, and the slow, deliberate movement of water in the main channels. The integrity of these channels is the highest priority. A small crack, a misplaced stone, or a blockage could, in this heat, lead to disaster, either by flooding a delicate rose bed or, more commonly, by starving the distant fruit groves. The awakening begins not with a sound, but with a persistent, low-frequency pressure on the eardrums, the steady, distant droning of the Persian wheel already beginning its slow, unceasing turn. This sound, more vibration than noise, is the ambient pulse of the Arambag. It is immediately accompanied by the sensory oppression of the Indian climate, the heavy, saturating heat, thick and motionless, already clinging to the air inside the simple, mud-plastered quarters. You are still horizontal on your woven charpoy cot, but consciousness is dragged back by the suffocating perfume. Not a light, pleasant fragrance, but a dense, humid cocktail of thousand blossoms, the cloying sweetness of night-blooming jasmine mixing with the sharp, earthy scent of disturbed soil, and the deep, slightly resinous odor of high canopy mangoes. You realize with the slow resignation of a body not quite ready for the sun that the brief cold mercy of the night has fled, and the day begins instantly with the demand for labor. You are rising in the servants' sarai, adjacent to the meticulously ordered Mughal garden, perhaps in Lahore or Agra, circa 1675, where the first rule of life is punctuality, and the measurement of time is the sun's rising intensity. You quickly rise, pulling on your simple cotton tunic and tying your waistband. The first rule of the garden is punctuality, though the day is measured not by clocks, but by the sun's rising intensity. Before the sun clears the palm fronds, you must be in the garden, ready to receive instructions. Your feet tread on the cool, tamped earth path leading from the servants' area into the central garden structure. The Aram Bagh is not a wild, accidental space. It is a triumph of mathematical order and control designed by Persian-trained engineers and architects. It is a four-part garden divided perfectly by two intersecting main water channels and walkways, symbolizing the four gardens of paradise. Every tree, every plant, every precisely leveled flower bed has its designated, non-negotiable place. It is a geometry of green, utterly dependent on human diligence. The man you report to is the head Mali, often called the Mali Akas. His name is Akbar, a man whose skin is permanently stained green and brown from soil and plant matter, and whose hands are thick, calloused, and incredibly sensitive to the texture of a leaf or the dryness of the earth. Akbar has already been awake for 2 hours, performing the initial, crucial water inspection. The first duty is a silent, observational circuit of the garden. You follow Akbar, absorbing the lessons through pure vigilance. The path takes you along the perimeter, where the garden meets the high, fortified walls that keep out the dust, the pests, and the prying eyes of the outside world. The sound that immediately dominates the environment is water. Though the air is still, the sound of water is pervasive. The gentle trickle of the shadar, the distant groan of the Persian wheel being readied for the day's lift, and the slow, deliberate movement of water in the main channels. The integrity of these channels is the highest priority. A small crack, a misplaced stone, or a blockage could in this heat lead to disaster, either by flooding a delicate rose bed or, more commonly, by starving the distant fruit groves. Akbar stops near a square plot, one of the hundreds of carefully defined subplots. He kneels, touching the soil with the back of his hand, testing its temperature and moisture content. He points without speaking at a faint, pale line running along the mud wall of the subplot. This line indicates a minute salt efflorescence, meaning the water is evaporating too quickly from this spot, drawing salts to the surface that will sterilize the soil. Your task, communicated with a single gesture, is to re-mud and slightly deepen the tiny irrigation ditch that services this square, ensuring the water lingers longer and soaks deeper. It is minute work, demanding absolute precision in leveling and sealing. Your gaze is drawn inevitably to the mango groves, the economic and symbolic heart of this particular garden. The emperor is renowned for his passion for the fruit, demanding not just any mangoes, but the most exquisite, delicate, and difficult to cultivate varieties, the Alfonso, the Langra, and the Dussiri. These are not simple seedling trees. They are complex genetic achievements maintained solely through the painstaking art of grafting. You walk beneath the shade of the mangoes. The air here is cooler, thick with the oily, slightly resinous scent of the leaves and the intoxicating sweetness of the fruit ripening high up. Akbar stops near a young tree, which has been carefully propped up with thick bamboo canes. The canes are wrapped with old cloth to prevent chafing the bark, and they are tied with knots that allow for slight give in the wind, but not slippage. He runs his hand along the trunk looking for two things: the faint, nearly invisible trace of the graft scar, the pot wand, where the desirable scion was joined to the hardy rootstock, and any sign of insect infestation. He points out a single small patch of cobwebs near a cluster of new leaves. A single cobweb in this context is not a simple nuisance. It is a sign that a spider has established territory, and where there is one insect, hundreds of others are ready to follow. Your first physical labor of the day is the monotonous, painstaking task of handpicking pests. Armed with nothing but a stick and a piece of damp cotton cloth, you must meticulously wipe every leaf cluster in this section, inspecting the undersides for sap-sucking scales or the minute larvae of the mango hopper. This is slow, back-breaking work, performed with your head tilted back, staring into the dense canopy, your neck beginning to ache immediately as the sun rises higher. The insects must be destroyed not with chemicals, which would taint the fruit, but with diligence and careful crushing, one by one. The sun has now cleared the horizon. Its rays hit the water channels, creating a blinding, sparkling path down the center of the garden. The heat is transitioning from suffocating to actively hostile. It is the hour when the Rahat, the great water wheel, must be working at full capacity, beginning the slow, relentless lift of water from the deep well or the distant river, driving it through the sophisticated network of clay pipes and plaster-lined channels that feed the perfection of the Chahar Bog. Your day is measured by the flow of this water, and the true heavy labor of the garden is about to commence. You feel the first beads of sweat trace paths through the dust on your forehead. The sun is now fully present, a hostile disk climbing quickly above the eastern wall, and the transition from the sweet, humid dawn air to the sharp, dry intensity of the day is instantaneous. The initial meticulous work of handpicking pests and repairing the minute salt damage has offered a brief reprieve, but now the heavy labor begins, the management of the lifeblood of the Aram bag, the water. The garden is sustained by two massive sources, both demanding constant human mediation. The distant, continuous groan of the Persian wheel is the rhythmic heartbeat of the estate. Located slightly outside the main garden walls, the Rahat is a masterpiece of simple, relentless engineering. Large wooden gears driven by the slow, circular plodding of a pair of blindfolded bullocks, raising water in a chain of terracotta pots from the deep well or the adjacent river channel. The sound is a low, ceaseless creak and clatter, a sound that defines the hours, yet is so constant it fades into the background, like the pulsing of one's own blood. Your first major assignment of the day is to work the main supply channels. You join a small team whose entire existence is focused on the movement of water. You are given a simple, heavy kurpi, a wide-bladed tool used for scraping and digging, and a heavy basket woven from reeds. Your clothes, already damp with sweat from the simple act of standing, quickly become saturated as you enter the environment of the main channel. The main channels are lined with lime plaster or smooth, polished red sandstone, designed to minimize friction and prevent leakage. But perfection is temporary. The heat and the thirsty earth are constant enemies. Your task is to patrol a 200-yard section of the Nahar, constantly monitoring the flow velocity and looking for the slightest sign of sabotage by nature. A burrowing rat, a misplaced root, or the subtle shifting of the stone lining can create a leak. A leak is not just a waste of water. It is a direct threat to the meticulously calibrated system, diverting the vital supply and potentially undermining the foundations of the walkways. You spend a quiet, focused hour patching. You kneel by the channel where the cool, flowing water offers a momentary, deceptive relief. You use a mixture of fine mud and a small amount of lime, a kind of primitive, quick-setting cement, to fill the minuscule cracks. The work is painfully slow and detailed. You press the cool, damp paste into the crack with your thumb, smoothing the surface with the flat of your kurpi. The pressure and friction slowly wear the skin thin on your thumb, mixing the gritty mud with your own sweat and abraded skin cells. You must wait for the mud to set just enough to hold before the force of the water washes it away. But the real muscle-straining effort comes with water distribution. The Chahar bag must be watered in precise phases, dictated by the head Mali Akbar's judgment of soil moisture and plant need. The formal flower beds, the delicate jasmine hedges, the rows of imported cypress. They all have different needs than the deep-rooted mango groves. This distribution is managed through a complex series of sluice gates and temporary mudweirs. Akbar approaches your section, inspecting the flow. He points toward a large square subplot where rare Persian roses are planted. They require slow, controlled soak. To divert the main channel water into the smaller feeder ditches, you must build a temporary dam. You kneel down in the mud adjacent to the main channel. You use the kurpi to scrape up heavy, wet clay soil from the bank. You then take the sticky, dense mud in your hands and begin to mold it, shaping it into a low, smooth surface barrier across the flow of the main Nar. This is not a gentle task. The water is forceful, and you must work quickly against the current, pressing the dense mud down hard with the heel of your hand and forearms to create an impervious seal. Your hands, perpetually wet, are now covered in a thick, dense layer of clay, heavy and cold. As the main flow is diverted, the water level behind the dam rises, and the sluice gate leading to the rose plots is carefully open. The water spills into the smaller ditch. Your final task is to then monitor the flow in the small ditch, ensuring it moves at the correct, slow pace, fast enough to travel the distance, but slow enough to be absorbed by the soil. If the water runs too quickly, it bypasses the thirsty roots, wasting precious supply. If it runs too slowly, the sun evaporates it before it reaches the end of the plot. You use the kurpi to make minute adjustments, a small furrow here, a tap of mud there, constantly battling gravity, evaporation, and leakage. This work of building and breaking dams, opening and closing sluices, and monitoring flow is repeated dozens of times throughout the long morning. Each time you are kneeling, pressing, scooping, and shaping heavy, cold mud, then standing up into the searing sun to visually inspect the progress. Your body is a hinge, repeatedly folding and unfolding, and your lower back begins to burn with the accumulated strain of repetitive motion. The sheer volume of water you are responsible for moving and directing is staggering, and the pressure of its scarcity hangs over every scoop of mud. By mid-morning, the heat reaches its zenith. The air is still, dense with humidity rising from the meticulously watered earth. Working directly beside the sun-drenched channels, you are subjected to intense reflected heat from the stone and the blinding glare off the water's surface. Your cotton clothes cling to you, utterly soaked through with sweat and mud. The constant wetness prevents your body from cooling effectively, forcing your internal engine to labor harder and harder. You drink frequently from the warm, slightly metallic water carried in a clay pot, but the sweat pours out faster than you can replace it. You are not permitted to stop. The water cycle is unforgiving. If the mango groves, which require a massive, deep soaking during this critical ripening phase, are neglected for even a few hours, the internal pressure of the fruit will drop, the flavor will be stunted, and the emperor's favorite harvest will be diminished. The continuous mind-numbing labor of water management, the patching, the shaping, the monitoring, the damming, is the price paid for every drop of sweetness the garden yields. The sun beats down relentlessly, driving the rhythm of your work. You move the water dictates your movement. The sound of the rahat continues its mechanical, slow, endless complaint in the distance, promising an unceasing supply that demands unceasing labor. The relentless demand of the water channels finally eases slightly as the main flood of water has been directed toward the deeper, more distant sectors of the Chahar Bagh. Your task now shifts from the brute force management of flow to the micromanagement of life itself, specifically centered on the emperor's greatest passion, the mango groves. This is the heart of the garden's prestige, and failure here is not merely inefficiency, it is a personal insult to the Mughal ruler's palate, an unforgivable offense in the silent hierarchy of the estate. You leave the main channels and enter the dense, overlapping shade of the established mango canopy. The air here is immediately cooler, heavier, and overwhelmingly fragrant, dense with the scent of sun-warmed fruit and resinous leaves. Each mango tree, a prize variety like the badami or the delicate thin-skinned khazar, is treated not as a component of a grove, but as an individual monument demanding bespoke attention. Each is surrounded by a carefully constructed circular earth basin designed to hold a precise volume of water and ensure slow, deep saturation of the roots. The first mango-specific chore is precision watering and soil inspection. The main water from the large channels is diverted into narrow tertiary ditches that feed each thala. Your job, equipped with a small, curved scoop, is to ensure that the water flows into the basin without eroding the fragile rim, and that the basin fills completely and slowly. You spend long, tedious minutes squatting or kneeling beside the base of the trunk, using the tool to gently break up the dried crust of the soil surface, a process called light scarification. This is vital. If the surface is too hard, the precious water will simply sheet off or evaporate uselessly. You work meticulously around the feeder roots, ensuring you break the soil crust just deep enough to allow the water to penetrate, but never deep enough to injure the fine root hairs. The repetitive scrape and tap of the tool against the dry, compacted soil creates a soft, continuous shh sound, a rhythm that induces a kind of meditative monotony. After the water has soaked in, you move on to the most critical, delicate, and mentally exhausting task: fruit thinning. The mango tree, in its eagerness to reproduce, produces an enormous quantity of small, potential fruits clustered tightly together. If all were allowed to mature, they would be small, flavorless, and fibrous. The emperor demands quality, meaning only a fraction, the absolute best, can survive. Equipped with a long, thin bamboo pole, often tipped with a carefully sharpened piece of metal or a split reed, you begin the painstaking process of selective pruning. You must visually assess hundreds of small clusters high in the branches. For every 10 potential fruits in a cluster, only one, perhaps two, are permitted to remain. You look for the fruit with the best shape, the thickest stalk, in the most advantageous position for sun exposure. The rest, the runts, the misshapen, the poorly positioned, must be snipped off. This work is performed slowly, with your head constantly tilted back, staring into the glare filtering through the dense green canopy. The sunspots dance in your vision, and your neck burns from the awkward angle. You extend the bamboo pole, steady your breathing, and make the minute, precise movement to snip the unwanted fruitlet. The tiny, unripe fruit drops onto the earth with a soft thud or plink, adding to the carpet of rejected bounty. The psychological toll comes from the necessity of destruction. You are deliberately removing potential food, potential currency, to enhance the perfection of the few. This process is repeated thousands of times on a single large tree, consuming hours of silent, focused concentration where a momentary lapse of judgment could ruin a prize-winning branch. In the midst of this thinning, you must also manage the threat of the midday sun and the persistent pests. For the handful of fruits deemed truly exceptional, destined for the royal table, a further layer of protection is required. You must engage in the slow, meticulous chore of bagging. You climb a simple, rickety bamboo ladder that groans under your weight, or use an even longer bamboo pole with a specially designed cup at the end. You carefully cover the largest, most perfect fruits with small muslin or buttercloth bags. The bags are tied shut with fine string, often dyed crimson or royal yellow for easy identification. This bagging prevents fruit flies from laying eggs, protects the tender skin from wind chafing and sun scald, and shields the delicate fruits from the sharp beaks of parrots and crows, which are ever-present threats. Handling the fruit requires an almost religious gentleness. A bruise the size of a thumbprint, invisible today, will manifest as a brown, spoiled patch upon ripening, rendering the fruit useless for the emperor. You spend hours ascending, stretching, bagging, and securing. Your hands coated in the sticky, slightly bitter sap that oozes from the mango stems, which instantly attracts gnats and dust. Finally, there is the ritual of soil enrichment. Mughal gardeners understood the need to replenish the soil that the demanding fruit trees constantly depleted. This involves the application of special, aged organic matter, a mixture of well-rotted cow dung, river silt, and wood ash, often carefully infused with neem leaf extract to deter subsurface nematodes and pests. Your job is to transport the heavy baskets of this slow-cooked, pungent compost from the fermentation pits outside the walls. You spread the compost evenly in a wide, shallow ring around the thala of the tree, ensuring it never touches the bark of the trunk itself, which would cause rot. The smell is deep and earthy, a heavy, musky counterpoint to the sweetness of the fruit above. The effort of carrying the heavy baskets, performed under the searing sun that is now directly overhead, strains the last reserves of energy in your shoulders and neck. By the time the midday Zuhr prayer call echoes faintly from the distant city mosque, you retreat momentarily to the deep shade of the largest banyan tree or the thick-walled shelter near the cistern. Your eyes ache from the sun, your back is stiff from kneeling and climbing, and your hands are a mixture of dry clay, sticky mango sap, and the residue of organic manure. You have spent the morning battling the tyranny of the perfect fruit, eliminating the many for the sake of the few, defending the precious few from the relentless pressure of nature, and ensuring the lifeblood of the garden flows precisely as the emperor commands. The reward is simply the right to survive to the afternoon. The midday Zuhr prayer call, a low, drawn-out drone from the distant city, marks the briefest possible cessation of labor. It is a moment of necessary stillness, not rest, taken in the thick, cool shadow cast by the high, perfectly trimmed cypress hedges or beneath the massive, sprawling banyan tree, whose roots are as old as the garden itself. The heat is now total and oppressive, a physical blanket that muffles sound and slows thought. You consume a simple meal, a flatbread, perhaps a meager dish of lentils and more of the warm, metallic water. The energy gained is immediately offset by the energy required to digest it in this extreme climate. As the afternoon begins, the work shifts from the high-stakes precision of the mangoes to the ceaseless, low-level war against entropy that defines the aesthetic perfection of the formal garden. The Chahar Bagh must not only survive, it must look immaculate, a geometric fantasy of order in the chaotic world of heat and dust. The primary enemy of the afternoon is dust. The Indian plains are an environment of perpetual fine silt, carried by the slightest breeze, and the garden's beauty depends on its exclusion. Your first task is the sweeping of the walkways, the wide, clean paths of red sandstone or polished plaster that define the garden's grid. This is not casual sweeping. The sand and silt must be removed completely, minute particle by minute particle, ensuring the paths look as though they have just been rained upon. You use a wide, soft-bristled broom, and the work is performed slowly, deliberately, bending slightly at the waist. The dry friction of the broom against the stone creates a soft, continuous hush-hush sound, punctuated by the rhythmic, heavy movement of your feet on the hot stone. You move the dust toward the edges where it is captured by a small, shallow ditch, ready to be carried away later. This repetitive motion, under the intense, blinding glare of the afternoon sun, reflecting off the red stone, quickly becomes a hypnotic form of torture. Next comes the management of the formal flower beds, the non-edible heart of the garden's fragrance. The emperor expects the garden to be a sensory experience, primarily through scent. This means the roses, jasmines, and narcissus must be in perfect, perpetual bloom, or at least appear so. Your attention turns to the arduous chore of deadheading and precise pruning. You spend hours kneeling in the hot, dark earth, surrounded by the dizzying, cloying scent of the flowers. You use tiny, specialized iron scissors or a sharp thumbnail to remove every single spent blossom, the deadheading. A faded or wilting flower is a sign of decay, a flaw in the geometry, and must be eliminated immediately. This work requires close inspection, eye level with the soil, searching through the dense foliage. You are constantly inhaling the dense, humid perfume, which after hours becomes less pleasant and more oppressive, contributing to a dull headache. The pruning is equally meticulous. The cypress trees are not allowed to grow naturally. They are sculpted into sharp, clean, geometric cones or towering hedges that reinforce the garden's rigid design. You use heavy, long-handled shears to remove any stray sprigs, any errant growth that dares to break the straight, controlled line. The heat, combined with the continuous, forceful squeezing motion required to cut the thick wood, strains the muscles in your forearms and palms. You hold the shears high, cutting slowly, section by section, ensuring the hedge wall is perfectly vertical, a dark green monument of human will against natural chaos. This precision work is essential not just for aesthetics, but for microclimate control. The thick, high hedges create the necessary shade and windbreak to protect the more delicate rose varieties planted beneath them. A poorly maintained hedge allows the dry, hot wind to penetrate, scorching the flower petals instantly. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the west, you return to the water features. The main channels and the marble fountains are beautiful, but they are also magnets for leaf debris, pollen, and dust. The afternoon chore is the silent, methodical cleaning of the water. Using a fine mesh net or a long-handled scoop, you must skim the surface of the main channels, removing every single floating object. The water must appear pristine, a clear, reflective surface that doubles the sky and the garden's geometry. You patrol your section, moving the net slowly, lifting the debris, and depositing it into your basket. The movement of the net creates a small, continuous ripple, the only break in the afternoon stillness, a sound of gentle, rhythmic displacement. The cleaning of the fountains and cascades is even more demanding. The stone, particularly the carved marble, must be kept free of algae and mineral deposits that build up from the water. You use a brush, often made of stiff coconut fibers, and a weak vinegar solution to scrub the stone surface, working on hands and knees. The cold water splashing onto the hot stone provides temporary relief, but the constant bending and scrubbing exhaust the legs and lower back. The day's labor is defined by this doubling down on perfection. The morning saves the fruit from nature. The afternoon saves the garden from itself. It is the work of repetition, of correcting the same minor flaws that appeared yesterday and will inevitably reappear tomorrow. There is no innovative challenge, only the demand for unwavering consistency. By the time the shadows stretch long and cool across the walkways, the garden is ready for its evening ritual. The dust is contained, the hedges are sharp, the water is clear, and the flowers are pruned. You have expended every last calorie managing the environment, and the reward is the exhaustion that promises a few hours of deep, dreamless sleep before the cycle begins, anew with the scent of the humid, demanding dawn. As the sun finally touches the horizon, marking the Maghrib prayer, the intense, stabbing glare gives way to a soft, golden light that bathes the garden in a temporary, deceptive warmth. The heavy stone walkways, which had absorbed the day's immense heat, now begin their slow process of radiation, releasing waves of warmth that mingle with the rising humidity. This is the moment the garden is considered to be at its peak, the moment of aesthetic perfection demanded by the emperor. The water channels, newly skimmed, reflect the changing sky perfectly, doubling the height of the sculpted cypresses and the intricate geometry of the Chahar Bagh. The work, however, is not over. The final tasks are ceremonial and deeply economic. You join a small team for the evening flower harvest. This is not for pleasure, but for immediate necessity. The most fragrant flowers, the deep red roses and the sharp, ethereal jasmine, release their most potent oil in the cooling air. They must be picked swiftly and carefully, one by one, before the night insects descend and before the petals lose their volatile scent compounds. This harvest is destined not for decoration in the garden, but for the royal household, to be distilled into attar, infused into bathing water, or scattered in the private women's quarters. You move quickly down the long lines of bushes, the sticky heat combining with the cloying, intense perfume, which now feels less like a luxury and more like a physical residue coating your throat and hands. Simultaneously, the daily census of dropped fruit must be conducted. You are sent to systematically patrol beneath the mango groves, collecting every single fruit that has fallen naturally or has been knocked down by wind or pest. These mangoes are considered gair kisam and are strictly not for the emperor's table. They are gathered into separate, rougher baskets. This is the garden's secondary economy. These fruits are allocated to the servants or sold in the local markets to recoup minor costs. The inventory must be exact. Every fruit is accounted for to prevent pilfering, a crime treated severely in the Mughal service. You then pick up the heavy, bruised fruit and drop it into the basket. The thud of fruit hitting wicker is a quiet, continuous sound in the lengthening shadows. As the light fades, the moment of accountability arrives. The head Mali, Akbar, conducts his final circuit, walking slowly down the main axis of the garden. He does not speak unless absolutely necessary, and his inspection is a silent, terrifying judgment. He is looking for flaws, a leaf left on the polished walkway, a sliver of dust missed by the broom, a faint trickle of water escaping a dam built hours ago. You stand rigidly by your tools, your body throbbing with fatigue, knowing that his silence is not praise, but merely the absence of immediate condemnation. The psychological pressure of this silent scrutiny, after 12 hours of unrelenting physical effort, is intense. He is checking the visible outcome of your soul-crushing diligence. If the garden is perfect, it means you were perfect. If there is a flaw, it is a flaw in your dedication. With a curt nod, the single dismissive gesture that releases you for the night, Akbar confirms the garden is secured. Your final physical task is the securing of the water source. You must return to the main Nahar channels and manually close the primary sluice gates that feed the garden from the external river or well. This prevents overwatering during the night and guards against theft, as external villages often seek to illegally tap the emperor's privileged water supply under the cover of darkness. The heavy wooden or iron gates must be manually lowered and bolted, a final, heavy expenditure of muscle that leaves your arms aching. You retreat to the sarai with the rest of the staff for the evening meal, the sham kakana. It is simple, identical to the midday meal. Roti, dal, and perhaps a small, precious quantity of spiced vegetable curry, eaten quickly and silently. The only conversation is low-voiced, practical talk about the next day's schedule or the condition of the bullocks on the Persian wheel. The exhaustion is too profound for social chatter. The only focus is refueling and achieving unconsciousness. The long night begins with the heavy responsibility of the night watch. Though you are released from digging and pruning, the garden must be protected. A small contingent, often composed of older, less physically capable Malis and dedicated guards, takes up their posts. Their job is the monotonous, anxious patrol of the high walls and the main gates. They listen for the faint scratch of a thief's shovel attempting to breach a channel or the desperate thwack of a stone hitting a mango branch. The darkness is not a time of peace, but a shift of labor, from the war against nature to the war against desperation. You finally lie down on your charpoy cot. The air is still humid, but the floor stones are cool. The perfume of the garden, rose, jasmine, and mango, is now so ingrained in your cotton tunic and your skin that it is the very scent of your exhaustion. Your back aches, your hands sting from the sap and the stone dust, and your mind is blissfully, utterly blank, having been purged of all complex thought by hours of hypnotic, repetitive labor. You fall instantly into a deep, heavy sleep, knowing that the only thing that awaits you is the blinding sun and the rhythmic groan of the Persian wheel, signaling the unyielding start of a new, identical day. The continuous, cyclical rhythm of the garden, the daily water, the daily sweeping, the daily culling of dropped fruit, is occasionally broken by periods of specialized, intensive work that require an even higher degree of slow, dedicated vigilance. These are the times when the Mali-e-Khas Akbar calls upon his most trusted workers for tasks that determine the long-term health and therefore the enduring value of the mango groves, the calculus of pestilence, and the sacred ritual of the graft. The constant battle against disease and pests is fought not with sudden, dramatic application, but with painstaking manual preparation. For days you are diverted from the channels and assigned to the preparation pits outside the main garden walls. Your job is the monotonous manufacture of natural deterrents. This begins with gathering vast quantities of neem leaves whose bitterness is known to repel insects. You spend hours sitting under the punishing sun, meticulously stripping the small dry leaflets from the branches, collecting them in sacks. The leaves are then dumped into huge copper cauldrons with water over a low, slow-burning fire fueled by dried cow dung. The mixture must be brought to a gentle boil and then left to simmer for an entire day until the liquid is thick, dark brown, and highly concentrated. The resulting odor is a pungent, oily, bitter smell that clings to the air, driving away not only insects, but all pleasant fragrances. The truly tedious work is the filtering and application. The thick, acrid liquid must be poured through layers of fine muslin cloth to remove every piece of sediment or leaf fragment that might clog the application tools. You must strain the liquid slowly, holding the heavy, hot vessel steady while the dark, viscous oil drips through, drop by deliberate drop. Your hands become permanently stained and scented with the bitter, medicinal essence of neem. Once the concentrate is ready, the application process is a pure exercise in slowness. Using small, simple reed brushes or lengths of coarse cotton, you must paint the mixture onto the undersides of the mango leaves and along the tender new shoots. The mango hopper and the scale insects, the tiny sap-sucking enemies, hide precisely where the sun does not reach. This requires hours spent with your head tilted back, one eye squinted against the glare, methodically turning over each leaf cluster, ensuring a full uniform coating. Your arm muscles burn from the constant tension of holding your hands high and steady. This is a task that punishes speed. If you rush, you miss a patch, and that single missed patch becomes a nursery for the next wave of infestation. But the most high-stakes, silent labor of the garden is the annual grafting ritual, the pot wand. This is not a common event. It occurs during a precise window in the slightly cooler seasons, when the sap is running just right and the air is neither too hot nor too dry. This task is the sole method of propagating the emperor's unique varieties. These prized mangoes do not breed true from seed. They must be surgically attached to hardy, common rootstock. For this ritual, you are inducted into the inner circle, working directly under the silent, tense supervision of Akbar. The tools are minimal but sacred. A specialized razor-thin grafting knife, meticulously sharpened to a mirror finish, a roll of wax-coated muslin tape, and a bucket of fine, clean clay paste. The silence during this work is absolute, broken only by the faint snick of the knife and the sound of your own anxious breath. The process begins with the selection of the scion, a small, healthy cutting from the tip of the desired mother tree. It must be cut at a precise angle, a single, unwavering slice that must not be touched by human hands. The rootstock, usually a robust young seedling of a wild variety, is then prepared. Your moment of critical, focused tedium comes when preparing the rootstock for the tongue and groove joint. With a heart pounding against your ribs, you must hold the young rootstock perfectly steady while Akbar makes the vertical slit and the small, crucial upward cut that creates the receiving flap. Your job is to clean the exposed wood with a piece of fresh, damp cotton, a surface tension task. No dust, no dirt, no moisture must remain. Then comes the joining. Akbar seats the scion perfectly into the rootstock slit, a moment of silent, almost surgical precision. Your task is the meticulous sealing. You wrap the junction immediately and tightly with the wax-coated muslin tape, starting well below the wound and finishing well above it, ensuring absolute exclusion of air and water. The wrapping must be tight enough to hold the tissues in contact for fusion, but not so tight as to girdle the young stem and choke the flow of sap. The continuous, winding motion of the tape, applied with immense controlled pressure, makes your fingers tremble with strain. Finally, you take the damp, clean clay paste and gently mud seal the entire junction, creating a thick, protective cocoon that will shield the fragile union for the critical weeks of healing. This precise, slow ritual must be repeated hundreds of times. Every single grafted tree is an insurance policy for the future of the emperor's dining table. The success rate is never 100%, and the knowledge that a moment of rushed movement, a misplaced sliver of dirt, or an imperfect pressure in the wrapping can condemn a prized lineage to failure hangs heavy in the air. The work is physically easy, no digging or hauling, but the mental strain of perfection is the heaviest burden of all. By the time the last scion is wrapped and mudded, hours have passed in a haze of surgical focus. You step away from the grove, your eyes aching from staring at the tiny points of contact, your mind exhausted not by complex thought, but by the demand for unwavering steadiness. The ultimate success of the Mughal garden lies not in the splendor of its architecture, but in the silent, often invisible, and infinitely tedious application of specialized knowledge, repeated with religious discipline. One perfect cut and one tight wrap at a time. The fate of the imperial mango hangs by a thread of muslin. The surgical intensity of the annual grafting ritual, while a break from the daily monotony of sweeping and watering, only serves to underscore the profound lack of personal agency that governs life within the Aram Bagh. Your existence is dedicated to the abstract perfection of the emperor's palate, a man you will likely never see, whose taste in fruit dictates every fold of your day, every ache in your back, and every calloused layer on your hands. The harvest itself, the moment that should represent peak achievement, is merely the most intense, precise, and nerve-wracking iteration of the cycle. When the mangoes are finally ripe, a period determined not by a calendar, but by the perfect confluence of temperature, sun, and internal sweetness, the entire garden staff enters a state of controlled anxiety. The head Mali, Akbar, now becomes a meticulous auditor, The harvest is not a festive gathering. It is a silent, rigid economic exercise. You are assigned a basket and a long bamboo pole tipped with a net or soft cup, designed to cradle the delicate fruit without a single bruise. The mangoes must be picked in the earliest, coolest hours of the morning, before the sun can raise their internal temperature and diminish their volatile flavor compounds. The picking itself is slow, careful, and systematically documented. You are required to call out the count of every fruit harvested from your designated tree. Every mango, especially the bagged, prize varieties, is immediately subject to a triple-level inspection. First by you, then by a junior supervisor, and finally by Akbar himself, who uses his trained nose and eye to determine its ultimate destination. A perfectly formed langra is placed on soft straw in a shallow perforated wooden box. An almost perfect one is relegated to the kitchen for jams or preserves, and a slightly bruised one is tossed into the common pile. The monotony of grading, the constant visual comparison of near-identical fruit is overwhelming, turning the simple act of sight into a source of fatigue. The true weight of this monotony lies in the complete economic disconnect. You are tending to a crop worth a fortune. Each box of prize mangoes, transported under armed guard, represents wealth that you will never touch, never see, and whose value far exceeds your meager annual wage. Your reward for producing perfection is not a share of the profits, but the continuation of your job in the absence of punishment. The finest fruits are loaded onto cushioned carts, covered with wet muslin cloth, and sent to the capital, leaving behind only the scent and the responsibility of the next year's growth. The social structure of the garden reinforces this psychological trap. The Malis form a silent internal caste system based entirely on proximity to the most valuable plants. Akbar, the Mali Akas, holds his position by virtue of unblemished history and perfect silent knowledge. Any deviation from tradition, any new idea, any attempt to increase efficiency that might risk the quality is instantly stamped out. Innovation is a risk. Repetition is survival. The only way to move up is through the natural attrition of age or death, and the only skill required is the ability to do the exact same thing, year after year, with unwavering, zero-defect performance. The mental landscape of the garden is therefore one of stasis. You are trapped in a perfect, ordered loop. The four main Nahar channels are straight, the hedges are clean, the soil needs constant water, the pests need constant deterring. The environment is one of total, enforced predictability. There are no great stories here, no grand adventures, no unexpected events save for the occasional, dreaded monsoon that disrupts the flow and demands a frantic, temporary re-engineering of the entire system, only to return to the baseline perfection when the rains cease. This is the ultimate reason you would not last a day in the Mughal garden. It is not the heat, though the heat is brutal, nor is it the physical labor, though the labor is ceaseless. It is the psychological void created by the sheer, unending redundancy of perfection. The modern mind craves growth, novelty, and the validation of visible progress. In the Arambag, perfection is the only goal, and perfection is always, by definition, the same. Once achieved, it must merely be maintained, a task that offers no learning, no change, and no mental reward. The day ends as it always does, the fading light, the final weary scrub of the walkways, the rhythmic drone of the Maghrib call, and the cool scent of the marble reflecting the sky. You eat your simple meal, your mind utterly exhausted by the relentless demand for zero-error performance, your body aching from the heavy, wet clay and the heat. You collapse onto the charpoy, the combined smell of jasmine, manure, and bitter neem oil heavy in your lungs. In the final, brief moments before oblivion, you hear the distant, monotonous groan of the Persian wheel. It is being checked for the night, its slow mechanical complaint promising that deep beneath the earth, the water is already being drawn, ready to demand your full, unchanging attention when the dense, humid dawn breaks once more. The cycle is whole, the work is eternal, the garden is perfect, and your mind, desperate for a story, a surprise, a failure, or a success that deviates from the norm, would break under the weight of this beautiful, unending, boring sameness.